Joining us now to break down these parallels is Paulo Figueiredo, the vice president of the nonprofit Pan-American Prosperity Institute. So, Paulo, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight because that statement from Joe Biden, for example, seemed a little bit out of what was supposed to be being talked about during that debate. I mean, for the most part, it was domestic issues in the U.S., yet Joe Biden did take that opportunity to take a shot at Brazil. So I want to ask you, what's been the response like in Brazil?
Thank you for having me, Alex. First, we found a little bit odd to see Joe Biden talking about the Amazon forest in Brazil in the middle of the debate, while we see what's left of the California's forest burning on TV every day. And forests that are managed by his party in the U.S. So maybe, I don't know, he can take some of that money and redirect to save America's forests instead of Brazilians' forests. But of course, what struck Brazilians the most was not the criticism, but to see, I believe, for the first time in history, a presidential candidate in a debate to threaten an ally, because Brazil is an actual ally of the United States. Brazil is a preferred ally of NATO. And it's not Venezuela, it's not North Korea. And Biden was threatening the sovereignty of Brazil during the presidential debate. And what was that? And he's going to offer us money or what? Or sanction the country? This sounded a lot like an offer we cannot refuse. Is that some sort of Biden Corleone international policy? I didn't understand that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was strange. And I think for a lot of our viewers, too, it's important to note that the point he was trying to make, he was criticizing President Trump for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. And that's why it was still even strange that he would use Brazil in order to make that point. I mean, if you want to make that point, you can make it against President Trump, who is right there on the debate stage. But that was something that was interesting that stood out to a lot of people, too. But while we're talking about Brazil, there are parallels, of course, between President Trump and Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. They've been compared for a long time. But most recently, a lot of people are making the comparisons that both leaders have now contracted coronavirus. President Trump is currently trying to recover from it. Jair Bolsonaro did, and he's, essentially been on the back to business as normal ever since. I mean, he didn't really skip a beat so much. So I want to ask you, in your country, in Brazil, how were people responding to that diagnosis?
Well, the left reacted how we expect the left to react, mocking and wishing our elected leader the worst, right? Being affected should not be seen as a demerit. Most of us will get infected at one point, or probably. This is especially true for those who don't have the privilege or the luxury to work from home. And I think this is something that people can relate. So the common man in Brazil, he admired the way that President Bolsonaro dealt with the disease, and I think he was at the end he was very successful. He rested, and in a week or two he was feeling well, much like President Trump, except that President Trump got well in 72 hours.
Yeah, no, and that is another interesting point that you bring up, because I think it's a very good one and an important one. It's the idea that this coronavirus pandemic, it's going to affect poor people. It's going to affect rich people. I mean, President Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, they're some of the most protected men on the entire planet. So I think you're exactly right to say that this virus will infect a lot of people, regardless of your social status, political status, economic status, whatever it may be. So I think it's time for people to kind of acknowledge that reality to some degree, because here in the U.S., for example, we're having these conversations about lockdown orders and whether or not that it's doing more damage, if you will, than the actual benefit that it's trying to instill. But I want to stay on Bolsonaro for one more second, because after that as well, I know that his polling numbers did fluctuate a little bit, going upwards, I should say. And now, of course, President Trump is in a campaign year. Do you suspect that the same type of thing that happened in Brazil, a sense of patriotism, will instill here in America?
Well, Bolsonaro proved that he's stronger than the virus, right? Stronger than the disease, and this brings a very powerful message for everyone. He's the leader. He's our leader, and that's a very strong message. Right now, his polls are closer to the highest point in his entire mandate. So in his entire term, Brazilians are brave people. So they sided with the president's approach of not hiding home and facing the virus like an adult, you know?
No, I think that's a really good point because, in fact, we were just talking to Liz Harrington, the spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, and she said something very similar, that Americans want to be treated like adults when it comes to this issue. They don't want the government telling them, you have to do this, you have to wear a mask, you have to close your business. I mean, there's an argument to be had that those are effective ways of preventing this virus from being transmitted, but I think the average American wants to make that decision for themselves, the same way that the average Brazilian wants to make that decision for themselves. I mean, there are direct parallels between the U.S. and Brazil when it comes to this issue. And I think that we can learn from one another. And I think what you're saying right now is very symbolic of the way that many Americans are feeling right now as well. But Paulo Figueiredo, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight, helping us understand these parallels, because I think they're going to be very important moving forward. Thank you.